Good afternoon, Barry University. I'm Michael Brechtel. First of all, I'd like to say that we are here, if you don't know it, because of my partner, Teresa DeShilo. We are all here because of her. Don't worry, she's alive. This is not a eulogy. But I did want to mention a few things. I've only been doing this for about 5-6 years. She's been doing this her entire life. 22 years ago, she founded the Trauma Resolution Center in Miami. At the time, she knew that this work that we're doing is not a mainstream medical model. So at the very outset, she began with all clients taking validated pre- and post-tests for PTSD, depression, and anxiety. And now, 22 years later, over 15,000 people have been helped. And a number of years back, she got some university partners involved in analyzing the data that's accumulated over all these years, and found that in an average of 20 to 25 hours of individual sessions, and that's hours, these are untimed sessions, so that's fewer than 20 to 25 sessions. People who came in testing for PTSD, depression, and anxiety no longer tested for PTSD, depression, and anxiety, and no longer had the intrusive thoughts or problems that they had when they came to us, people even with very, very complex trauma histories. I'm going to just very quickly mention a couple of things. Our process involves some little psychoeducational groups in the beginning just to kind of explain what trauma is and what it is that we're going to do with them so they're not surprised by anything that we do. And then the first individual session involves a very lengthy 2-hour in-depth that actually has received a lot of input from University of Miami in designing the research-friendly aspects of it. So it's very, very thorough. From that, the practitioner, prior to the second individual session, puts together a charged areas list, which is basically just a list of things that have happened in this person's life which may be traumatic. We don't judge that. It's all very client-driven. So the beginning of the second session, that list, which could be several pages long, is presented to the client, and they evaluate, they give us a number from 0 to 10, subjective units of distress. How charged is that item for them now? Lots of people with complex trauma histories may have a lot of 9s and 10s on their list. Fortunately, the way that trauma tends to work, it becomes a network. And we find frequently that after a person has completed even a fairly small number of traumas, in terms of the traumatic incident reduction, the main method that we use, when we go back through that list, it may be several pages long, but all of the numbers have dropped from 9s and 10s to 1s and 2s and 3s because of the interrelationship of one event to another. A lot of times an event that would not have been traumatic is traumatic because of the person's prior trauma history. So this is one of the reasons why, and one of the things we found out early on as the university students started to work on our data was that there were a lot of people who were leaving without having completed a post-test. And so we instituted a midpoint test after 6 hours of individual sessions, and we found that those people were leaving because they were done. After only 6 hours of individual sessions, they no longer had PTSD, depression, or anxiety. Because this work is front-loaded. People tend to tackle the most disturbing things first, and once they're no longer disturbed, their life is more important to them than therapy, so they don't come back. And that's great. you know. We complete clients, all right? So, you know, so much for job security, but there's plenty more out there, I promise. Oh, what else did I want to say about her? Oh, gosh, yes, yes, she's been quite a figure. She's been a consultant for SAMHSA and is on the was on the Gatsby Committee for Trauma Screening and Primary Care. She's was in India after the tsunami, Haiti after the earthquake, South Africa around the time of with Bishop Tutu around the time of the Reconciliation Commission. So she's quite something. How many of you know or have met Teresa? Okay. How many of you are currently interns at the Trauma Resolution Center? Okay, there you go. Yeah. We currently have 12 interns from 7 universities, and some have traveled to be in Miami to intern at the center. When you learn this procedure, when you learn this this process, traumatic incident reduction, you actually have to, as a part of the certification process, receive at least 10 hours doing your own work, working on your own trauma. And this is very important because you can't be expected to sit there and provide the kind of safety and space for someone else if you're constantly being triggered by your own stuff. So it's a very good process to go through. Is everyone familiar with the 6 blind men and the elephant? Anyone? Okay, yeah. Well, it's a wisdom tale out of the Indian subcontinent, and basically these 6 blind men came across the elephant, and one of them had a hold of the leg. He said, yes, an elephant is like a tree. Somebody else grabbed the ear. An elephant is like a fan. Somebody else had his hand against the side. No, guys, you're wrong. It's like a wall. And so on and so forth. They each had a different piece of the elephant, and they just stood there arguing, unwilling to let go of the piece of the elephant they had. So they were all a little bit right, but they were all completely wrong. Okay? Now, you probably know something about trauma. You've got a piece of the elephant you came in with. I want to encourage you to let go of it. You can pick it up on the way out if you like. Okay? We're going to walk around the elephant together and get a few different views of it, learn a little bit more about it. Trauma is a part of the human condition. People have been dealing with trauma quite successfully for all of human history. Okay? If you were in an indigenous community somewhere, 500,000 years ago, when something happened to someone and they began not being themselves, they began to be anxious or depressed, or they exhibited multiple personalities, or other kinds of, they experienced PTSD and started responding and reacting to things that weren't actually happening in the moment. They didn't have access to the vocabulary of modern psychiatry because, of course, it didn't exist. But they had a very apt way of describing that. They might say that the person had lost their soul. Okay? And they might send them to the shaman or medicine person, or they might gather in ceremony, and they would do some things, some of which are very effective, to help reunite this person with their soul. Soul retrieval. And just because they use different words doesn't mean that what they did was any less valid or effective. And communities very often had ways of helping people through traumatic events. We don't have communities like that anymore. We just don't. Not in this culture. So keep in mind that this is something, it's a part of the human condition. It's something that we've dealt with for all of human history. So trauma is not a mental problem, a medical problem, a substance abuse problem, a work performance problem, a learning problem, a financial problem, a relationship problem. although if it's left unresolved, a traumatic memory is left unresolved, it can result in any or all of these and an early death up to 19 years earlier than people who don't have severe trauma histories. Our response to trauma is a highly successful survival mechanism that keeps us alive in the moment, but if we don't resolve it, if we don't reset the alarm, then it keeps going off. It's like a bank alarm, burglar alarm. You know, in the moment, the most important thing is apprehending the robber. But if the next week the alarm's still going off, you know, people are going to stop coming to the bank, the employees are going to quit, you know, eventually you just got to reset that alarm and things get back to normal. Stress comes from the Latin. It means to pull tight. There's good stress, you know, the kind that gets us out of bed in the morning to do things we like to do. There's too much stress, chronic stress. Whose water bottle is that? Just pick it up for a minute. Is that stressful? Okay. I want you to hold it there until we're done. Okay? No, you can put it down. Okay. So lots of times things that we have weighing on us continually can create chronic stress, which for a moment is not so bad, but over time can be quite a bit. And then there's traumatic stress. Trauma occurs when an actual or perceived threat of danger or loss overwhelms a person's usual coping ability. Now, everybody's coping abilities are different, and I'm going to use a story that Teresa likes to use. Her ex-husband was a Navy SEAL until he died, and they were walking down the street in L.A., and somebody with a death wish decided to rob them. So he jumped out with a knife, and of course, you know, she was like, "Oh my God, give him anything he wants," you know, and he was like, boom, you know, the guy was on his back, you know, and she was, "Don't kill him," you know. So, you know, his pulse didn't even go up, you know. It's like, okay. And then a few months later, a little dog that they had broke his leg, you know, and she was in the kitchen trying to tend to him, and she had to send him out of the room because that was just like too much for him. So, you know, everybody has different coping abilities depending on our experience and our genetics and so forth. So you can't really judge someone based on, and we do all the time, unfortunately, on the things that traumatize them. First of all, as I said, trauma builds, it becomes a network. So if somebody is traumatized or overstressed by something that's happening in the moment, you don't know what they've been through. Okay? It's not simply a matter of their coping skills in the moment, but also the fact that they may be triggered by something that happened in the past. Something that may be very different from what's happening in the moment, but is still somehow connected. How long do you suppose something has to last to create an overwhelm and a traumatic memory? How long do you suppose? Anyone? Yeah, it can be instantaneous. It can be a very, very small gap. So, there are some ways of identifying low coping abilities. The things that we're most reluctant to talk about may be areas of low coping. Okay? And also the things that we talk about all the time in respect to other people. Okay? We see this all the time, you know? The person crusading, the homophobic politician who's crusading against all that time, and then, you know, soon enough they're in the news for what, right? You know? Because we deny a lot of things in ourselves and project them onto other people. Now, this is a definition from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's concept of trauma and guidance from a trauma-informed approach. Individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful and life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Very comprehensive definition. Obviously, a committee created it. but it is very complete. Are you familiar with the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system responses? They activate different spinal nerve pairs and result in different physiological responses throughout the body. You may know them as the stress and the relaxation response. Okay? I prefer to call them the maintenance and the survival response. Okay? Now, this is important. I slow down for important things. I talk fast through the rest of it. In the extreme ends of this, when we're deeply and profoundly relaxed, we experience profound healing and restoration. Our body, all of the systems of our body that are focused on maintaining and repairing itself are active and working. We may experience altered states of consciousness, which allow us to integrate memory and have healing, deeply healing experiences. Our attention and energy is focused internally, and we can have connection to spirit. On the extreme end of our survival response, we may experience dissociation and loss of self. Our attention and energy is focused externally because our focus is on survival of our physical body in the moment. And we have a connection to the material world. We're very externally focused. This extreme response, this continuum is an allocation of resources. Okay? You probably, has anyone ever gotten a massage? Okay, yeah, you're good. Good for you. One of the things that happens during massage is as you relax, the blood drains from your extremities and you can get cold in your extremities. Your blood goes to your core. You're over here. All of the core processes, digestion and all of these kinds of things, they're very essential to our long-term well-being. But in a survival mode, they shut down. Okay? Our blood, we only have a certain amount, right? We don't get any more. Our blood goes to our arms and legs, and we get a burst of adrenaline. We get very physical. We get really focused on fighting or fleeing, right? Okay? Which is great. You know, your boss yells at you, and you want to punch him or run out of the room. How often has either one of those been effective for you? Okay? The problem is that we only have one stress response, and it is focused on the integrity of our physical body. Unfortunately, there's a parasitic growth up here. We call it the prefrontal cortex. And it allows us to have things like abstract thoughts. And we get to think about things like our job or our money or our relationships or our car as if they were actually physical parts of our body. And when we perceive a threat to any of those things, we act as if our body is being threatened. And we experience a response that's completely irrelevant to what we're trying to protect. So we spend a lot more time in this response than we should. The average person has their stress response activated 50 times a day. If you're lonely, depressed, pessimistic, or unhappy at work, it'll be more than twice that many. This is very important, okay? Because the stress chemistry, as we'll talk about later, actually damages the body, okay? It's meant to be a choice between dying in this moment or surviving to feel better later, right? So our body hits us with some really powerful chemistry that it really can't sustain on a day-to-day basis. Now we're going to take a minute, and I'm going to go through a process called coherent breathing. I want you to all just follow along. We're going to take some deep, full breaths. Okay? I want you to, when I tell you, I want you to breathe into your belly, then your chest, then lift your shoulders a little, and as you exhale, drop your shoulders, drop your chest, and breathe out of your belly. Okay? We're going to take long, slow breaths. It's going to be a 6 count. I'm going to count. Inhale. Go ahead and do it. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Keep up that pace for a while. Whenever you have the opportunity, set a timer for 5, 10, 3 minutes, whatever you've got, and breathe at this rate. That works out to be 5 complete breath cycles per minute. If you can do it longer, that's great. But at this point, you're simply expanding your lungs as much as you possibly can. Normally, we don't do that, particularly if we're being stressed 50 to 100 times a day. We control our breath to control our emotions and to keep them at a distance. So one of the other things that can happen when we're doing deep, full breath is that we may trigger in a state-dependent memory unprocessed emotions that we stopped earlier by virtue of holding or restricting our breath. Okay? So there are some forms of breath work that we use to actually intentionally trigger those states, to get access to those emotions and feelings and experiences so that we can work with them. And that's another thing that we do at the Trauma Resolution Center is breath work, because it's very effective in addressing trauma within the body. We also do massage and acupuncture and yoga and things of this nature as well. But by doing this deep, slow, full breath, you're switching your brain chemistry from the survival mode to the relaxation mode. How many of you are students? Okay, yeah. So do this for 10 minutes before your next test. Okay? Because it will help flush the adrenaline from your body that you've been all worked up about. And adrenaline prevents you from retrieving previously formed memories. So you will be more likely to remember more when you're taking the test. Oxytocin is also effective at resetting our stress response. This is why a hug is an intuitive thing that we do when someone is upset. Okay? If you're going to hug somebody, though, don't do this silly stuff. You lean in here and do no. Step in and do it right. Okay, you want to have at least like 3 full, slow breath cycles. Okay, and don't even count. Let it go 5 or 6 if you need to. Okay, but just hug them. Okay, really good. Okay. Now, of course, when we're talking about research, okay, we're not going to go around hugging people. That would just not be. That would be just too unscientific. So they actually do they create these oxytocin inhalers. Yes, for people with PTSD, so they can determine scientifically if oxytocin resets the stress response, and indeed it does. Okay? But really, somebody with PTSD probably could use a hug, So just be aware of that. We all know that war trauma. So what is trauma? We all know that war traumatizes. 31% of vets returning from Iraq and Afghanistan were diagnosed with mental health and their psychosocial problems. 56% of those were diagnosed with 2 or more disorders. Now, isn't that interesting? We have dual diagnoses. Now, what is that about? What is that? That's about our culture's tendency and our medical approach, its tendency to focus on symptoms rather than causation. Okay? What we do when we work on trauma is we're focusing on the cause, not the symptoms. And when we focus on the cause, all of the symptoms are simultaneously addressed. And if we're successful in focusing on the cause, then we no longer have